Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining in on Sprinto and Astra's webcast on strategizing cybersecurity in 2023. As we come to the end of 2022, we wanted to hear from our security leaders and we want to bring them in to share tips and tricks on how companies should look at security as a whole. Today, we are joined by Girish Redekar and Ujwal Ratra. Girish is the CEO and co founder of Sprinto and has helped over 150 plus companies with their information security compliances. Ujwal Ratra is the CEO and co founder of Astra Security and has helped over 500 SMBs protect their company assets with the help of technology. Thank you for joining in, Girish and Ujwal. They will be walking us through their take on security best practices and strategies, and we will jump into a Q&A session afterwards. Do add your questions in the chat, and we'll get to it right after the presentation. Without further ado, Girish, you can get started. Let me
Thanks,
just...
Aarti. Thanks, Ujwal, for joining me.
Thank you, Girish. Thank you, Aarti, for doing this. I think I'm really looking forward to the discussions that we have today.
Nice, excited as well. Let me just share my screen. Yep.
Great. So, I thought I'll start with the most common security threats that most startups might likely face. And, especially cybersecurity starts becoming for startups who have this combination of not all the resources at their disposal to counter these security threats, but at the same time they are most startups are technology companies first, which means that security is an important aspect for them. One of the first things I typically try and tell startups is that the the archetype the archetype notion of security is usually about this cat and mouse game between like somebody who's trying to actively hack into your system and you're trying to protect it, and the Hollywood version of it. But it turns out that most potent threats don't come from bleeding edge attacks. They're actually simple to fix things that you can actually fix by having good discipline and making sure that you follow certain processes. Some common security threats that I typically recommend to starters first start looking at, these are just baseline things that you can do with little or no expense or effort, is basic things, hygiene things like passwords. If you are and your people in the company are reusing same passwords and not very strong passwords, there is a chance that you're likely exposing yourself to a chance of an attack. Phishing, you could have all the uh, fancy security tools, but if your employees are not aware of simple things that could happen with phishing, which would mean that you have all the more secure passwords, but if you are sharing your credentials on a phishing website, then that's a typical common security threat. uh, One obvious ones which has been around for decades, malware, ransomware, downloading them, installing them, and losing access or granting access to something that's potentially harmful on your computer. There are a bunch of things around spoofing of emails, social engineering, which we have commonly seen nowadays, where especially if you don't have your signatures on DKIM on your company email set up correctly, or you allow somebody else to spoof or act like somebody else, and consequently get information from you or your employees in the company. That's a common and very popular way of actually starting a security attack. uh, Increasingly, most companies are remote or at least hybrid, and increasingly people in the company are working from homes, coffee shops, airports, whatnot, and that fundamentally means that your laptop becomes like a fairly important attack vector. Just leaving your laptop unattended at some place, public place like that, could simply give access to somebody else to it. Losing your laptop could potentially mean losing access to something sensitive. um, the next three ones are pretty simple. One of the things I've often seen is that some basic mistakes around ensuring that you removed access for people who leave your company uh, can lead to problems. This is just basic discipline about ensuring that the right people have access to the right systems within the company. There are I think some of us will remember that recently there was this whole thing around Log4j, and a few years ago there before that around Heartbleed. These are common vulnerabilities that you find in dependencies. These are some of the things that you can quickly look for and fix. And for those of us who are developers like me, we'll talk about secrets in code. Like this is so commonly you share some credentials or something in your code in a small GitHub gist somewhere, or just in your code, and that just gets indexed, and it's a very easy way of getting access to something sensitive inside of your system. So this list is by no means exhaustive, but these are some of the top commonly faced things that I typically see that startups usually face, or these are some of the top things that you could actually start protecting yourself against to begin with. Next slide.
Yeah, I think Girish, when Girish mentioned that, whenever we think of a attack or a security attack, we kind of envision the Hollywood version of it with someone sitting in hoodie and a green screen going right in front of them. But that's actually not true. And the common things that Girish mentioned around passwords, around malware, around accesses, which is one of the biggest things, that is something which a lot of us fail to kind of notice or even act upon. And these are not some things which need a lot of effort to act upon. So I'll just talk about a few things, taking up from the previous slide, on how we can essentially ensure that we mitigate most of these. And a lot of these are just something that is a basic hygiene that all of us should maintain, and you can actually start those right away. It doesn't need like a long planning of a few months. For example, passwords, right? MFA is something which everyone provides now. Any third party tool that you might be using, it could be your CRMs, it could be absolutely anything, your own tools that you might be using, that is all something where you can make sure that you implement a multi-factor authentication. It could be through any say a Google authenticator, it could be through SMS. So all of these are easy to implement, and this is something that you can do. Again, across all of your at least internal applications, you could make sure that you have a single sign-on. uh, Arti, are you there?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I think there's something wrong with my internet.
No
I,
worries. No
just
worries.
a second.
Yeah, I think we can. I
Yeah,
can
we
see
have
this.
it back.
You can see the screen? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
oh, great. The second thing is single sign-on. So across at least all of your internal applications, if there are any external applications you don't allow, that's a different ball game. But if across all of the applications that allow and all of your internal applications, you could make sure that you have a single sign-on enabled, which is also linked to the employee official passwords, official email. So that is something that can be done. And again, passwords. This is something which cannot be stressed enough. Do get a password manager. We'll also talk about a few other password managers. There are also self-hosted solutions, so that won't cost you anything. But this is something which is very important. Make sure that you're not sharing passwords over on messaging, Slack, WhatsApp, emails, etc. Make sure you're using secure password managers to share the passwords internally across the team. The second thing around phishing, social engineering, I think all of you would have heard of recent, say, the Uber attack and all of these things, right? This is all social engineering. Now, these are the best security teams in the world, uh, having all the resources at like for them, working for them, and still you would see that things get compromised there. So, as they say, humans essentially are the weakest link in security, and that is where no amount of training is too much training, but you should do like certain trainings which could be around social engineering, phishing, spoofing, test campaigns, etc. Especially with the work from home situation, right? I'm sure a lot of you would have experienced random emails coming to your employees, acting as the employer, acting as the CEO, acting as someone senior in the team, and asking for bank account information, asking for sending across the salary back. So this happened with one of the companies that I know. In one of my friends, they basically acted as the CEO, and they asked for the sending across the salary because the company was having hard times. So these are again a lot of things that people keep on trying, but you need to make sure that you do adequate trainings and also run test campaigns. So a lot of times you can just run test campaigns to see if how people are responding to those. Just add like run like a phishing test campaign. Then you have malware, right? So malware protection for your end user devices and also for your cloud assets. So I think this year, in fact, Amazon also started off malware scans in guard duty. So that is also something that you can enable for your cloud assets. Then the physical security of laptops. This again, uh, working out of a coffee shop, not locking your screen, right? Or losing the laptop, not having a backup. So stuff like that. Another thing is password policies. This again is something that which we ignore a lot, but have some kind of password policies, which could be changing the passwords every 30 days, every 60 days, and then also what is considered as a valid password in your use case. So make sure that you have certain password policies for your employee laptops. Access control. This again is a very hygiene thing, but this is something that you need to live by. I feel that if by default, if you are a person who believes in access controls or the principle of least privilege, that is something that flows all across. So try to restrict the privilege to where only need to know basis. So whoever needs certain information should have that certain information. If there's no business use case for them to have that information, make sure that they don't have it. uh, a lot of times this is something which people implement in tech, so you would have your developers only have access to certain repos or no one else having certain accesses. But this is something which is not, which what I have seen is not true across departments, right? So your marketing team, like, you wouldn't know who has access to, say, your Google Analytics account or anything around your tag manager and stuff like that. That is where things start going a little haywire. So make sure that across departments you follow the principle of least privilege. Review accesses frequently. Make sure that each of your tools, whoever has certain access, make sure that you review those frequently. Again, how frequently depends on your use case. There's no right or wrong answer there, but make sure that you review frequently. And one important thing there is the ex-employees, right? So as Girish mentioned, make sure that you remove their accesses. One thing which people skip there is, while you might remove the accesses, uh, practically all of us might be using certain tools which have shared access, right? So you might, whatever said and done, you might have certain tools where you have only bought one account, right, or limited accounts, and there are people using that. Especially happens in your marketing team, sales teams, etc., right? That is where, make sure that if someone has left the organization, you can't revoke the access because they didn't have like a account, but make sure you change the passwords, make sure you have MFA enabled and stuff like that, so that while you have removed their singular accounts, the shared accounts are also something which are not compromised. And again, the vulnerabilities which we are talking about, this is something, which we can't stress enough. This is something we do day in and day out. So essentially, this is, you need to scan your applications, you need to scan your code for regular vulnerabilities. Even if you haven't made any changes, you are probably dependent on 100 other libraries, 100 other different tools that you might be using downstream. And that is where you need to make sure that even if your application is scanned for, the any newer vulnerabilities that are coming up in those are also scanned for, and you are aware of those. So these are certain things that I would suggest you can make sure that you start doing. Some of these are some things you can start implementing. I would say new year is a good time. All of us would have certain resolutions, so maybe you could pick up few of these for the new year's resolution. Arti, we can move on to the next. Yeah.
Right, got lots of good points there, Ujwal. I really like the idea of making security a resolution for New Year. And like you were mentioning, no matter how many tools you purchase and what you implement, it turns out that people tend to remain the weakest link in the entire chain. And we've also increasingly seen that while uh, there's a lot of focus on ensuring that the technology folks in the company and the developers are aware, and they tend to be naturally a little bit more inclined to understand the effects of security. It is also extremely important to make sure that everybody in the company, technology or non-tech, is aware of the importance of cybersecurity. This is something that cannot be stressed enough. The example attack that you were talking about, Ujwal, where it happens via social engineering, and even companies with a lot of wherewithal like Uber, it typically starts from some place, where you get access to somebody who is not necessarily guarded enough for this. So what I typically ask startups to understand is that security starts from the top. You cannot expect people to take this seriously if the leadership, the founders, don't take this seriously and become an example for this. It's important for the leadership to instill the why, or why security is important. This is one of those things which is easy to become lax on, because every day that you don't have a security attack is a day that you seem to be doing something wasteful, which is not the case. It is important to have a lot of discipline about this, and it is the responsibility of the founders of the leadership to instill why security is important, and why it is a threat, even though it may not actually be resulting in something bad right now. This, you could have days and months and years without this happening, but that doesn't mean that it's not around the corner. I think specifically, I would ask leaders to set very clear, transparent, and visible signals that the leaders themselves are following security protocols. This is usually the best way of ensuring that everybody else in the company is aware. So, for example, if you are as a company taking any sort of security awareness training, or phishing awareness training, or social engineering awareness training, it is, I think, it is at least a good idea to ensure that if you as a founder finish this training, just post on your general Slack channel that, hey, I just finished this, and that just sets the trend for everybody in the company to understand that this is important, this needs to be happening. Over and above that, it is important to beyond sending the signals, to make this a part of your day-to-day operations, way of operating, which means ensuring that any new people who join the team, and even the existing people periodically thereafter, are going through awareness training of the kind of security threats that exist, and the kind of social engineering or phishing or spear phishing or any kinds of attacks that happen. Like Ujwal was saying, it is quite easy nowadays to actually hire services which can set up like phishing awareness training, and to just do these kind of things in your company, so that people are aware of how these things run in a trial, sort of a fire drill kind of a scenario, rather than actually having to deal with it in a real life scenario. So I would highly recommend taking advantage of tools such as these. There are enough and more out there which are free, so it doesn't cost a lot of money, and you can at least get started, especially as a young startup, to know about how you can protect yourself. Again, I would stress on the fact that people tend to remain the weakest link in this entire equation, and it's important that everybody in the company, tech or non-tech, is aware of the kind of threats that exist, and the only way to really do that is by education. Now, that could happen by talking about it often in common forums inside of the company, or by security awareness training, but this is something that needs to happen top down as well. Next slide. Right. So we talked about a bunch of abstract things. That I thought Ujwal and I would get down into a little bit of some specific, recommendations of tools that we have seen, used ourselves, seen other people in the industry use as well, in order to actually protect yourself. And some of these tools that I've listed here. This is again by no means an exhaustive list, but just some things that I've seen startups and scale-ups use as they grow along. The first category of software that I typically ask, I'm an engineer. This is typically the first thing that comes to my head is, simply static analysis tools. These are typically free. They have reasonably generous free plans, and if you're using a platform like GitHub, they will come out of the box as well. So I'd recommend tools like Sneak and Dependabot, and these fundamentally are just looking at both your source code as well as the dependencies that you're using for typical vulnerabilities that can happen. This I feel is a no-brainer. It is one of those things that's silently running behind with every pull request that you make. Just nudging you, they saying that, hey, this is where there might be a problem, and it's just like the lowest hanging fruit that as an engineer at least you can have implemented inside of your code base, and that just gives you like a lot of benefit, and just lets you sleep easier at night. These are the sort of things that will also look for things like secrets and stuff in your code, which can accidentally leak through without you wanting to look for, without you actually intending to do it. Those are another things that helps you sleep better at night, that there is something that's looking for this. Increasingly, most startups are cloud native, which means that the cloud becomes one more place where you will have a lot of vulnerabilities. thankfully, the big platforms come built in with ways to look for these vulnerabilities. AWS has Guard Duty, GCP has Security Scanner, Azure has Defender, and these are some of the uh, at least there are reasonably low priced versions of this or free versions of this that you can actually get started by. And I think I would highly recommend getting started by some of these things. They look for standard misconfigurations in your environment, common gotchas about how you set up your firewalls, whether your instances are in public or private VPCs, and so on and so forth. So I would highly recommend enabling these things. They don't cost as much, but they give you a lot of benefit. um, Over and above everything that you can do to protect yourself, it's always good to have expert help to make sure that your application is secure from an outside in attack. And scanning your website or your application, which is, as a technology startup, perhaps your most important asset. And pen testing it is an important is extremely important, I feel. And this is again a low hanging fruit. uh, Ujwal here is from Astra, and I highly recommend Astra to be able to do this pen testing and continue scanning your website for vulnerabilities and things that you can actually stop. uh, this is basically just black box testing your application for standard things like starting from SQL injections to anything else that could actually be causing problems on your website. um, if you are a startup who wants to invest in endpoint protection for the laptops, and especially if you are like a remote setup, then you should look at endpoint protection tools like Hexnode, which works across Mac, Linux, and even phones. Or if you're an Apple shop, then Karnji. If you're a Microsoft shop, then Microsoft Intune. And these are some of the common tools that I've seen for endpoint protection. um, the other thing that I typically recommend is that it is it is quite easy to get lost into like a sea of tools and security tactics, etc. And one of the things that is a good starting point, and to give you like a holistic way of looking at security, is to look at a compliance program like SOC 2 or ISO 27001. The thing to understand about these programs is that these are built by professionals who think about security holistically, which means that they're not just thinking about tools and services and systems, but also about people and processes, which is where, again, most attacks can likely happen. So they are thinking about things like, is your access control based on the least privilege principle, like Ujwal was saying. They are looking at things like, how do you make changes to your system? Do you have some defined ways and gated ways that changes can happen to your system? How are you thinking about security awareness training, and so on and so forth? Having a compliance program in place not only gives you the ability to sleep better at night. It is typically audited, which means that it is not just you claiming that you are secure. You can actually use this to demonstrate security to your customers, and that becomes extremely powerful, especially as a young startup. The last thing that I'd leave you folks with is that you can look at any of these tools and more. I believe that it's more important than picking the tools. It's important that whatever tools you pick, in some way or the other, are becoming a part of your day-to-day operations. That's where the real value of these tools lie. So if you have a tool which nobody really looks at, nobody pays attention, it's showing vulnerabilities but nobody's really attending to them, that's no good. The more important thing is to rather than picking the bleeding edge, the most expensive and the most effective tools, is to just make sure that the tools are being used effectively, and become a part of your day-to-day pipelines, whether operations, whether that's your CI/CD pipelines, with any way that you operate on a day-to-day basis. That's what gives you most bang for the buck. Next slide.
Great. I'll pick it up from Girish. I think I'll skip a few. I think both of us think alike in a lot of ways. So the first thing that I have written is SaaS. That is, as Girish mentioned, a no-brainer. So that is something that everyone should have. And a couple of them, Girish already mentioned, couple of them I've added over here. So Narcube is a good one. If you're using GitHub code scanning comes out of the box. That is something you can use. Checkmarks is also something that you can look at. The thing over here is, before even I go into all of these tools, the entire footprint of your org essentially comprises of like your product, which would probably be the main thing that you might be thinking of. But then again, there are processes and the people, right, which we've been talking all throughout. And what Girish mentioned as a last point around compliances ensures that you have robust processes in place to take care of all of these three. For example, a SOC would mandate you to have stuff like, say, employee background verification. It would mandate you to have stuff like access controls or a disaster recovery plan or a business continuity plan, etc. It would mandate you to also look at your product and have pen testing in place. It will mandate you to also have like code level checks in place. So compliance is essentially ensure that you have end-to-end robust processes in place, which takes care of all the important aspects of the entire org and looks at security from an entire organization level. And then essentially in terms of tools, what I'm doing right here is I'm focusing on the tools which are basically more around your product and your endpoints. uh, Depending on what your organization might be, you might also look at some asset discovery tools, but that is typically for larger orgs. For example, suppose if you are a multinational organization, you would probably want to see, you probably have thousands of hundreds of applications, and you probably would want to see if something is out there in the public, some random link is out there, some storage bucket is lying out there. So that is where you might also need to focus on certain asset discovery tools, but to know your entire footprint. But right now, I'm assuming that most of us essentially would have a limited footprint that we would be aware of. So, first thing there is SaaS, no brainer. Then DAST, which is basically the dynamic scanning, the continuous vulnerability scans, which we talked about, and that is essentially where SaaS is looking at your code. DAST is looking at your runtime application. So what the final application is, how the users use it, stuff like say SQL injection, etc. That might be there. Some tools that you can check out there is Astra, where I essentially come from. Burp is another one which is used across the industry. Then Akinetics has a dash scanner. um, then the cloud, right now all of us are essentially cloud native, cloud first, and whatever we do essentially is on cloud. So Girish actually mentioned about certain tools that come by out of the box, for example guard duty by Amazon, etc. uh, One thing that which I love about Sprinto as a platform is Sprinto covers a lot of important services across infrastructure. So if the entire platform of Sprinto, which looks at your end-to-end compliance and makes sure that compliance management is easy, has an important component of checking for certain cloud services which are important. So that is something I personally really like. Um, then a few other cloud scanners which you can use. Scout Suite is a open source product. You can use it. It's a very good product. Prowler again is one. Then WAF. So WAF is again an important tool that you need to use. AWS has its own WAF, Azure has its own WAF. You have Cloudflare, you can explore that. And then endpoint protection, which is basically your laptops, where you have Microsoft Intune, McAfee Endpoint Security, password managers. This is really important. You can look at Passport. If you self-host Passport, there's no cost to it. You can just host it internally. Then there's LastPass, and then there's Roboform, again, which you can explore. That is also good. Another interesting one over here is Privado, which I've added for data privacy checks. So depending on what kind of industry you are in, um, you can also look at Privado. Privado essentially discovers instances of any personal information that might be, leaking in your code, and you can also integrate it with your repos and stuff. So that again is again something which might be useful depending on especially the industry that you are in. At this point in time, I think all of us are in a industry which is affected by privacy. So this is something that you could also look at. And as Girish mentioned, one thing to basically ensure is that whatever you use becomes part of your dev cycles, right? It could be integrations with your CI/CD. It could be integrations with your communication channels. Could be say Slack. It could be integrations with your issue management, be it GitLab, Jira, whatever you're using, right? So you need to make sure that these become part of your dev cycle so that the adoption is easier. You could have the best tool out there, but if you don't use it, it's useless, right? You could have whatever is the offers the best security in the world. If you don't use it, it's useless, and you would only use it when it's seamless for your devs to use it, or when it's seamless for your team to use it. And you can't even go back and blame your devs for not using something if it's not easy to use, because they anyways have a lot of other things to take care of. And other some other things which I would recommend in addition to these tools is manual pen test and certain security cloud security reviews. So sometimes like again, all of these tools are good to have, great to have, but then again there are certain things which where you would still need manual intervention. Unfortunately, we are not at a place where, specifically in terms of pen testing, we're not at a place where you would be able to automate 100% of it. You need certain manual intelligence, and the special areas where this essentially kicks in is business logic specific vulnerabilities. So if you are say e-commerce, right? Or let's say, I'm assuming a lot of us would be B2B SaaS, right? So if you are a B2B SaaS, you probably would have access controls in your application. So if you're an HRMS, you would have a login for employee, for HR, for admin, and stuff like that. Now, how your access controls are coded, can someone escalate their privileges? Can an attacker who has the privileges of an employee take actions as an admin? Can they view salary of some other employee, or can they view accept leave of some other employee? Stuff like that, right? So that is something which is very specific to your business logic, specific to how your application is, how your access controls are. And that is where manual intelligence kicks in. That is where you probably would need a hacker mindset to see if someone who is with a malicious intent can exploit those things. So I'd recommend having like frequent pen test. Frequency again depends on you. A lot of compliances would mandate you to get at least once per year, but I would recommend to get at least once. And then if you have any major versions which are being released, again get those pen tested, because that is important to find out any business logic specific vulnerabilities. And yeah, I think a lot of it might have been repetitive because both of us are engineers. So sorry for that.
Okay.
Right. You made a couple of interesting points there, Ujwal. Especially about how it's important for there to be a manual component of the pen test, especially where intelligence is involved over and above what you can robotically scan websites and other systems for. And this is one of the things that which is why I recommend looking at a security compliance program as a baseline way of setting up your own security program, because it is virtually hard to think of all the possible cases in which you can actually become more secure. And the fact is that some experts have actually sat down and thought holistically about this, and thought about the processes and practices that you need to have in place so that you can actually become more secure. The flip side to this is that as comprehensive as these programs are, it means that somebody inside of your company has to keep tabs on about hundreds of these practices and processes, collect evidence about it, because you need to actually go through an audit, which is where you get the true value of this. And you need to do this on time every time that you're doing this. And in a typical technology startup, these things are going to fall into the laps of the engineers in the company, and then it becomes their job to manage the documentation, the tickets, the screenshots, the paperwork, and everything that comes along with ensuring that you are able to prove that you are following these practices on as expected. um, I mean, I think most of us will over here will agree that engineers are perhaps the most expensive resource in the company. The dev time is gold dust, and to be fair, their primary job is to build product and fix issues and not pushing paper. And this is where you sort of have this trade-off of whether you actually implement like a security compliance program which should give you all the benefits that it does, but what do you do about all the additional overheads that it typically costs for you as a company, and what do you do about that? So here is where I would highly recommend using a compliance automation framework, or a tool that does helps you automate your compliance program. Shameless plug here, Sprinto is one of the tools that actually helps you do this. And what will happen as a result of this is that all the heavy lifting, the busy work, the manual, error prone, laborious work that's around compliance, that is the one that gets taken care of, and you are left with the things that actually add value to you and help you become more secure. So typical compliance programs will give you like a well-rounded picture of what you need to do about access control, around change management, incidents, vulnerabilities, how you onboard employees, including stuff about background verification, and making sure that hiring evaluations are happening correctly, to make sure that they go through a security awareness training, and so on and so forth. So it's a great way of actually setting up a baseline security program in your company, so that you don't have to think through everything that needs to be taken care of. The huge advantage of this over and above this is that not only do you become more secure, you are able to actually demonstrate the security. And if you are a B2B SaaS company, this is extremely important, to be able to position yourself as somebody who doesn't think of security as a afterthought, but that you're serious about this. And that's why compliance is extremely important. uh, but you should be able to do it in a manner, um, that doesn't drain your engineering resources inside of the company and doesn't make you lose dev time. I uh, I often say this, that as a young startup, and anybody who has gone through this journey will probably agree that it's extremely important to pick the battles that you fight. You cannot be fighting on all fronts at all points of time, and especially the ones where a lot of manual effort is involved without a lot of leverage. Those are the things that you should be looking to automate, and I would highly recommend looking at compliance automation tools to be able to do something like that. Back to you, Ujwal. Next slide.
Yeah. I think I'll again reiterate a lot of things that Girish said, right? I would probably saying that in a different way for a different thing. But dev time is precious, right? Dev time is gold dust, and that is where we need to make sure that. So I'll talk about the pen testing side of things, right? And some best practices for startups for pen testing. A lot of times, what we have seen is unfortunately, the process of pen testing traditionally has been very full of to and fro's between the security teams and the dev teams. Uh, it has, from what we have seen traditionally, taken even for single products more than a couple of months. And a few months of dev time is like all of us know the cost for that today, right? Those essentially those months, sorry, could have gone into the next great feature that you had in mind, or the next big thing that you had in mind that you wanted to push out. So one thing which makes sure that that is smooth is that uh, your development is continuous, right? You push out something every week, every 2 weeks, sometimes every few days. That is something, that is a pace of your development. But your security is a point in time exercise where you think about it once a year, right? And you say, okay, hey, I'll go and get like a pen test done in December or in January or whatever, when the things are slower. That is not how it can be, right? If your development is continuous, your security should be continuous. Again, there are levels to it. You cannot get, practically you cannot get a pen test done every time you push out something new, but there are good level of vulnerability scans that you can do. These are self-served, these are automated. Every time you push out something, the dash scanner that we are talking about, right? The SAST and the dash, every time you push out something new, make sure that it runs through the SAST. Once it is deployed, make sure it runs through a round of test. That's about it. It is automated. You need not do anything. You just push out just like you push it out, and it scans. If there's anything, you just fix it. So that is all it takes for you to do. If it is integrated within your workflow, that's great. And when I say workflow, I mean CI/CD. I mean your issue workflow. So it could be Jira, GitLab, whatever. Something picks up, flow that back to Jira. Devs just pick up in the next sprint depending on severity and work on it. It could be integrated with your Slack. Something pops up, a notification pops up, your devs can act on it only when they need to act on it. So make sure that your security is continuous, your vulnerability scans are continuous. The entire pen testing process as such is integrated within your dev flows, be it your issue management, be it your communication, internal communication, or be it your CI/CD pipelines, and then make it easier for them to fix, right? So you could do like, you could know that you have 20 vulnerabilities in your product or you have 20 issues, right? But that's not important. Important is fixing those 20. So make sure that it's very easy for your devs to reproduce. So wherever you're, whichever team you're working with for your pen testing, make sure that for every issue that they have identified, they give you the steps to reproduce. This is typically standard, but from what we have seen, a lot of times people don't give out clear steps to fix. These are very generic things that they might give out, and then your devs have to spend a lot of time finding out how to fix, how to reproduce, stuff like that. So make sure that it's very straightforward for your devs to fix, just like it's very easy for them to fix, say, a broken link, right? You just tell them, you create a loom, say, hey, I'm clicking this, but I'm not going anywhere. It should be as simple as that for them to reproduce. It should be as simple as them that for them to fix. And then some rescans that the security team, the police and the thieves cannot be the same. So if your dev says, by no means I'm not saying don't trust your developers, but if the development teams thinks that the issue is fixed, don't take the word for it. Get it rescanned by the security team, by the one who originally found the issue. They would try to go around the fixes, right? Those are the people who know how to go around the fixes, how to go around the code. Those were the people who found the issue in the first place. Um, Then determine a suitable pen test frequency for your use case. Again, this is a lot of times, it depends on what industry you are in. A lot of fintech customers, for example, who we work with, get monthly pen test done. Now, for a lot of B2B SaaS, I would say that monthly might be an overkill, right? Again, security wise, there is no no such thing as too much pen test, but practically speaking, every month might be an overkill in a lot of use cases. But for a lot of banks, fintechs, etc., they need it. Now either they need it by choice or they need it by compliance or whatever that is, but they need it. So it depends on your industry. You might want to go for every quarter, every 6 months, every year. A lot of compliances mandate once per year, but determine a suitable frequency for you. At least go once or twice per year, and then at least have something for whenever you release a major version of the product. And when it comes to security, security is best done in layers, right? There's no single short way of saying, okay, I've done this, so I can, make sure that I am all hunky dory and everything's good. uh, Make sure that you have layers, right? So you get a pen test done, you know what your bare bones product looks like and what are the issues there. Then you have, say, a component of WAF on top of it that makes sure that proactively in real time, if someone is attacking it, that's stopping those attacks. Then have responsible disclosure programs that basically enable people to report responsibility to you in case they find anything. So make sure that you are taking this in layers. It is always best done in layers, and that is where essentially you would be able to be more sure about security of your business and sleep more peacefully. Arti, we can move on to the next slide. Yeah. Okay. So this is something that we wanted to talk about it. A lot of times, what happens is we just think of security as a CTO problem, right, or as a tech problem, while it is not. And one thing which interestingly happened with us was, we always wanted to have, map it to the financial risk. So interestingly, what we did a couple of, I think, around 6 7 odd months back, is that we took a lot of bounty data. So for people who don't know, you might have heard of, Apple giving some amount to some researcher who found a security vulnerability, or other companies. So there are responsible disclosure programs where companies reward security engineers for finding and responsibly disclosing vulnerabilities in their products. So this is called responsible disclosure or bug bounty programs, which you might have heard of. So what we did was we found we basically took a lot of bounty data and saw that what sized companies are giving what bounties on what type of vulnerabilities. For example, if you are, say, a 50-member company and you have a responsible disclosure program at certain revenue, if someone finds, say, an SQL injection in your product, what is a typical bounty that you're giving? And then what we did was, because we do a lot of pen tests day in and day out, we mapped for each vulnerability, we gave a dollar value. So if we found an SQL injection in your application, we said, hey, you know what? A company, typically your size company, if they give a bounty amount for this particular vulnerability, they would be giving out $7,000 to a security researcher, right? So if you just fix this, you outrightly save $7,000. And then what we did was we aggregated that over all the vulnerabilities that we found, and then across multiple assets and multiple projects that people might have. And that is where we realized that the seriousness with which people started taking it, and the time to fix that people essentially took to fix that vulnerability, that reduced drastically, right? So try to see it not as a tech problem, but as a actual financial risk, right? If there is a vulnerability in your application, that's an actual financial risk. If someone can buy your upgrade within your application without paying anything, that is an actual financial risk. So for every vulnerability, once we started giving out the financial risk, we saw that people started fixing those faster. So make sure that you look at security from that angle. You look at security not just as a tech problem or not just as a CTO problem, but as a company problem, as a problem which basically harms the entire company and has a financial repercussions for everyone in the company. What this also does is that each CXO internally could have their own metrics. So one common one is employee trainings and phishing campaign, where for each of the different departments that you might have, or different teams that you might have, you would basically say have a score of how protected or how trained that team is from phishing. And then the access controls again within teams, right? So this is where the tech teams fare very really well. A lot of tech teams would have great access controls in place, but if you go around your company and see other teams, finance, sales, marketing, all of us know that there are no access controls in place. Everyone has whatever access they need. If you need to give some access to someone, you just just add them, and that's about it. And they have all the accesses. So make sure that this is something which is true all across departments. And uh, another thing which we've seen work really well, we are in a very different world from where we were in 2019 or 2020, right? 2019, you used to talk about security when someone would ask you for it, or if you're going in for only for some compliance, or your customer is asked, or you're dealing with the bank, government, and then they say, hey, you know what, I need a certificate, I need a report, etc. I need you to be SOC compliant. Right now, it's a differentiator. It's a marketing differentiator. Right now, no matter whichever domain you are in, whoever you are selling to, security no more is an afterthought. In fact, security is a sales enabler right now, right? You sell to anyone, you sell to any business, any enterprise, any government, anyone. First thing they ask is, hey, fill up this 100 security questions, right? And if you have a SOC in place, if you have an ISO in place, if you get regular pen test done, that makes your life easier. Say, hey, this is my SOC, I take security seriously. You be in any B2C business, privacy, security, something which can be your differentiator. A thing like WhatsApp, which all of us have had to run, I don't know, still runs newspaper campaigns, right? Two-pager newspaper campaigns to talk about privacy. So it's not the thing which is not mainstream anymore. It's not an afterthought anymore. And one thing which C-level essentially, like the leadership at your company essentially can do, is start selling security internally and externally, right? You might be a CRM, but you can be the safest CRM, right? You might be an HRMS, but you can still be a safer HRMS. What that does is selling externally also make sure that you're selling security internally. So if I know that no matter whatever I'm doing, if I'm selling a CRM, HRMS, if I'm selling a cloud solution, whatever I'm selling, if I know that security is one of the tenant, if I know that I have a huge, a component in my footer or in my header in my website where I talk about security, or I have a section where I talk about security, that makes sure that everyone takes it seriously. Your marketing team will take it seriously because they are the ones who put it up on the website. Your copywriters will take it seriously because they are the ones who wrote the copy. Your content team will take it seriously because they would have written at least one piece of article about it, right? So think of security as a differentiator that you might have. Start selling it externally. That will help you sell the security internally. And that is where, as an organization, culturally, you would be making sure that you're moving towards a secure culture. And there is, again, like, security is just like life, right? There's no destination, it's just a journey. So you always are on the journey to be more secure. You always are on the journey to make sure that the organization as a whole, across people, processes, and technology, is safer and more secure. Yeah, Aarti, we can. I think
Yeah.
this was a good monologue to end. Now
Yes.
that I realize, I've compared security with life. So yeah,
No, it's a good segue into our Q&A session as well. We have a couple of questions that are coming up. I'm just going to read them out. For the first question, it's like from, yeah, do I think this happened when Girish, when you were talking about endpoint security. So the question is, do these endpoint protectors work for Linux, Ubuntu systems as well? If not, can you recommend some?
Yeah, so tools like Hexnode will work on Linux systems as well. They're not constrained to Mac and Windows. If you use Sprinto, we come with an endpoint protection tool built in called Dr. Sprinto, which again works across Mac, Linux, and Windows. So there are enough tools that will work across Linux machines as well.
Okay, that's one. Yeah, and then the second one is, yeah, from your experience, does it make sense to install antivirus softwares on Mac and or Linux computers?
Ujwal, you want to take that? Shall I?
yeah, you can go ahead.
So honestly, it's a myth that Mac and Linuxes don't have viruses. Just depends on where on the dial you want to be of how security conscious you want to be. It is true that most viruses are found for Windows machines, but that doesn't mean that Mac and Linuxes are completely free of it. So depending on where on the spectrum of being extremely paranoid to being completely careless you want to be, I would still recommend that you should look at antiviruses for Mac and Linuxes as well. Especially if you look at security auditors, right? They would typically ask this as a question. This is one of the favorite things that they're gotchas about. Ki, hey, it's not like Mac and Linuxes don't have viruses. You could potentially have security vulnerabilities there as well, and it is typically recommended you should look for antiviruses there as well.
Okay. And we have this one. So for a startup first pen test, do you suggest to start with the black box one? And when do you think bounty model security test could be useful?
Yeah. So I would suggest that doing like a black plus a gray kind of a model would be a good one to start. And when I say gray, I mean having certain information as an insider. So, as an example, suppose you have an application, say a web application, and the a black box would just need you to share the URL, and the security tester would just know the URL of the application, and then they would test it. A gray box is where you also share test credentials, so you allow the attacker to get in as a normal user would, and then see what are the things that they can do. So I would suggest a black and a gray box is a good place to start, as an external pen test that you get done. And bounty model, I don't think I have a definite answer for that. Right, I would suggest that if you have a disclosure program, that is helpful even in the initial stages. But in the initial stages, you could live without it and have like regular external pen test done. But I would suggest that have it as soon as you can, even when you have certain traction, have it. Because what happens is that a lot of times people are ready to help, right? A lot of times security researchers are ready to help, but they don't get a channel. So whatever they report just goes down the drain in some certain other contact messages. It doesn't take a long time to set up a bounty program. The good thing about it is that it is flexible, so you can choose to give certain rewards, whatever. You don't have to give like $1 million in bounty or whatever, $5,000, $10,000 in bounty. You can choose the amount. And But even before you have a bounty model, make sure that you get regular pen tests done externally, which are a combination of at least a black and a gray box. I hope that answers the question, Edwin.
Okay. Edwin, just let us know if you have any follow ups to that. And Jangi has asked, please elaborate about WAF.
So WAF is essentially like the firewall, a web application firewall, right? So um, what it does is it basically looks at all the requests that are coming onto your application. So wherever be your application, whatever requests that are incoming to your application, it will intercept those requests, check those requests, and in case the request have certain malicious patterns, it will block that request. So if someone is trying, say, an injection attack on your application, they would be trying out certain requests in that essentially will have an incoming request on your application. So the WAF will intercept that, check what the pattern of that request is. If the request pattern seems malicious, that request will be blocked. The request will never reach your application. So it's a firewall in truest sense, which basically protects your application in real time. So if you have a WAF enabled with certain rule sets, it will make sure that it's WAF is an application level firewall. You can also have org level firewalls, Janvi, which basically could be if you have a perimeter, or you could have physical firewalls or network level firewalls even in your cloud. But WAF by definition is a application level firewall. But you can have org level firewalls also.
Okay. Uh, yeah, and I think we have a yeah. Vivek has asked for an AWS cloud assessment. Which role would be ideal to allow third party to use to platform external audit?
So
Uh,
AWS, yeah.
Go ahead,
Girish.
Ajwal.
Yeah. So AWS, I think, Girish, correct me if I'm wrong, has a default security auditor policy, right? So you just need to create a new job function, a new IAM user, and attach the job function of security auditor. That gives read-only access to each of the services that you use across network, storage, compute, everything, to the third party, and then they can review the configs or the details for each services.
Okay, then we have another question. How do we rate limit for some particular requests? I don't know.
I think, is this in a context of a black box pen testing to rate limit?
They haven't mentioned anything. Yeah, can you let us know? It's HT. Can you please clarify that?
I think might not be in terms of pen testing as such, but more like if they're probably having certain attacks or probably might want to block certain IPs or countries, maybe.
Oh, like that. So actually, if you're looking like a DDoS kind of an attack, or just somebody just trying to do a lot of attacks in that manner, typically, especially cloud providers like AWS, Azure, GCP have something out of the box. I know for a fact that AWS has something like Inspector, which will point out and automatically block off requests that seem suspicious from one IP, which are just repeatedly just hitting your either API endpoints or just a like a web application URL, and which looks suspicious in that manner. So there are tools like that that you can use to ward off at least obvious rate limiting or DDoS kind of an effect attacks. So those are the low hanging fruits that you would start with. Of course, there are more sophisticated tools in the in the market to stop these things, but as an early stage startup, this is one of the first things that you could look at.
Okay. I hope that answers your question. Okay, we have one more. If you can just give us a follow up in case you want to answer anything else. Yeah, this is the last one. So yeah, can you recommend some tools that can be used to prevent DDoS? Sorry if I'm butchering that.
So yeah, I think this is something that Girish just mentioned. So uh, AWS has a good amount of DDoS protection. Cloudflare is something which you can look at for DDoS
Right.
protection, and these are certain good ones, right? At the end of the day, if I have to be true and sleep peacefully, there is uh, DDoS at the end of the day can definitely also boil down to resources game, right? So if someone wants to DDoS you, they will DDoS you. But the good thing about that is that I don't think a lot of people would want to DDoS, a lot of companies, especially the scale which we are looking at. So Cloudflare, AWS has Cloudflare is a good option. AWS has native option, so that is something that you can explore.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's about it from the questions point of view. If you do have any other questions, guys, please like you can reach out to us. In the meantime, if as you know that we are committed to helping fast growing startups like you all to scale with confidence, and with Sprinto and Astra, we have combined together to provide this kind of an security structure, like a security program that can help you all rest in peace and scale with confidence. So at Sprinto specifically, we have started the Ignite program that offers startups SOC 2 or ISO 27001 and expert support at a nominal price. Not only that, as part of the perks library, Sprinto Ignite customers will get discounts across Astra's pen testing service subscription for a whole year. That's something that you would should take advantage of, and that's something that will help you also start your security journey and like move with confidence. And I hope you had a insightful session, and thank you, Ujwal, thank you, Girish, for taking the time to put this together. And I hope this was of help to you. If you wanted to reach out to any of us, you can like reach out to me, Aarti at sprinto.com, or Ujwal, or with Girish at Sprinto, and Ujwal at getastra.com. And we'll be happy to help you. Thank you so much.